This is all mine." She said it like a punch, wrapped in silk, smiling, casual, loud enough for everyone to hear. Her friends clapped and whistled, spinning around in my living room, admiring the couch I chose, the art I hung, the shelves I assembled piece by piece on a Sunday afternoon. I stood in the kitchen doorway, half-shadowed, holding 2 grocery bags and a knot in my throat. She didn't see me walk in, or maybe she did and just didn't care. The words echoed louder than the clinking wine glasses. All mine. As if my name wasn't on the lease. As if my bank account hadn't been drained, quietly, slowly, to make this apartment feel like home. I had skipped vacations, sold off my camera gear, even canceled my dental work, all to cover rent while she was between jobs. I didn't complain. I believed in partnership, in shared dreams, in building something together, even if sometimes it meant I built while she watched. But in that moment, standing in the apartment I paid for, listening to her perform ownership like a monologue, I felt something cold flicker through me. Not just anger, not even betrayal. Something older, deeper, erasure. She didn't just forget me. She erased the version of me that held this place up when it wobbled. I watched her pour champagne into the glasses I bought and toast to herself, calling it her fresh start. And I realized then, I was no longer part of the story she wanted to tell. I was just the scaffolding. And now that the structure was standing, she was pretending I was never there at all. I didn't say anything right away. I walked to the sink, set the groceries down, and stood there pretending to adjust something on the counter. A cracked mug, a dish rag that didn't need folding. My hands moved just to stop my heart from doing something louder. Her voice floated through the room, sweet and polished, explaining how hard it was to find a place like this, how she finally got out on her own, how every inch of this space reflects her energy. I felt like I was watching a stranger act out a life that had cost me everything. Her friends nodded along, none of them questioning the narrative. Why would they? She looked the part, radiant, confident, perfectly curated. I looked down at my shoes scuffed and damp from the rain. I hadn't even been invited to this little tour. I had gone out to buy the snacks she asked for, thinking we were hosting them together. Instead, I had walked into a performance where I was neither acknowledged nor necessary. One of her friends glanced over and finally noticed me. "Oh, I didn't know someone else lived here," she said with a little laugh. My partner, if I could still call her that, tilted her head and replied, "Yeah, for now." Just like that. For now, I felt the floor tilt under me. Not because I didn't see it coming, but because hearing it aloud made it real. I was temporary, disposable, just another utility in her curated success story. I smiled, small and sharp, and excused myself to the hallway. Not because I was weak, but because I needed a moment to hold on to the parts of myself she hadn't already claimed as hers. In the hallway, the silence hit differently. It wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that follows a realization too loud to ignore. I leaned against the wall, staring at the photos we had once taken together, now framed as if this place had always belonged to her alone. Us at the beach laughing, us painting the living room with dollar store brushes. Us before us became something too inconvenient to mention when company came around. I pulled out my phone, scrolled back through months of bank statements, texts, lists of furniture items I bought while she browsed Pinterest. I saw screenshots of sofa colors, links to lighting fixtures she said were too expensive until I paid for them anyway. I saw proof in black and white that I had built this place from scraps and salary and stretch, and yet somehow, in front of a handful of strangers, she had claimed it all with a single sentence. Not a mention of me. Not a glance in my direction. Just a declaration. This is all mine. And the worst part? They believed her. They clinked glasses to it. I felt my throat tighten, not with tears, but with a quiet, burning clarity. She didn't want a partner anymore. She wanted a stage. And I, the woman who laid the floorboards of her comfort, had become background noise. I walked into the bathroom, locked the door behind me, and sat on the edge of the tub. I looked around at the towels I folded, the mirror I installed, the shelves I drilled into tile with blistered hands. All hers now, at least that's what she thought. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that people can erase you from a story until you pick up the pen. The guests didn't stay long. They never do when the show ends. By the time I stepped back into the living room, the last champagne glass was abandoned on the side table and her friends were filing out with compliments trailing behind them. Such a vibe. You've done amazing. This place is totally you. She soaked it all in, head tilted, smiling with the satisfaction of someone who'd pulled off a perfect illusion. I stood there quietly, watching her hug them goodbye at the door, thanking them for coming, like she was the sole architect of this sanctuary. When the door finally clicked shut, she turned and blinked like she had just remembered I existed. "Oh," she said, "you didn't have to stay in the hallway that long." No apology. Not even a shift in tone. I stared at her for a beat, then asked softly, "Is that how you introduce me now?" She shrugged. It wasn't the time to get into all that. All that. As if my existence, my contributions, my sacrifices, my rent payments were background noise to be muted for aesthetic purposes. I walked past her and began collecting the empty glasses, stacking them one by one into the sink. My hands moved slowly, not from fatigue, but from restraint. I had so much to say, too much, and none of it would matter to someone who had already decided her version of the truth was prettier than mine. She poured herself the last of the champagne and sat on the armrest of the couch, scrolling on her phone like we hadn't just lived through an emotional gut punch. "They loved the place," she said, not even looking up. And I thought, of course they did. They only saw the paint, not the hands that held the brush. Later that night, after she fell asleep on the couch mid-scroll, I sat at the kitchen table, in the dim light, staring at the spreadsheet I'd kept on my laptop, every payment logged, every receipt scanned, every transfer and split bill she forgot to pay back. Not because I wanted to weaponize it, but because I had needed to know I wasn't crazy, that the math added up even when the emotions didn't. I scrolled through it all, the down payment for the security deposit, the 3 months she didn't contribute because she was in a rough patch, the groceries I covered, the Uber rides to job interviews she never followed through on. I had documented everything, not out of mistrust, but out of responsibility, out of love. And tonight, for the first time, it felt like evidence of something else. How easy it was to let someone live in your generosity, while pretending they built it themselves. I opened another tab, searched for short-term rentals. I wasn't planning anything drastic, not yet, but I needed to remind myself that I had options, that I wasn't stuck just because I'd given so much. I heard her stir in the living room, her phone buzzing beside her cheek, and I suddenly felt like a ghost in my own story. I had built this life for 2 people, but only one of us still remembered that. I closed the laptop gently and took a deep breath. The air smelled like vanilla from the candle she lit before the guests came, a scent chosen to impress, not to comfort. That's what this had become, a performance. And I was starting to realize I didn't want to be part of the cast anymore. The next morning I woke up early, long before she stirred. The apartment was quiet in that sacred way only mornings can be, sunlight stretching through the blinds, dust floating in the air like memory. I sat at the kitchen counter sipping coffee from the chipped mug she never used. It was the first thing I bought for this place long before the couch or the curtains, when everything still felt like a shared dream instead of a one-woman show. I looked around, and for the first time I saw it all clearly. This apartment wasn't just a space. It was a map of everything I had poured into someone who never once poured back. Every corner held effort, every shelf compromise, every drawer something I had let go of to make room for her. I thought about how easy it had been for her to rewrite our story, to present it to her friends like a solo victory, and I wondered, how many other people walk through life draped in someone else's sacrifice, convinced they arrived there alone? The thought didn't make me angry anymore. It just made me sad. Sad for all the love I gave so quietly that it went unnoticed. Sad for the way I had taught her, unintentionally, that my silence was permission. But, mostly, I felt sad for the version of me who still hoped she'd notice. The me who stayed up fixing the wobbly shelf, thinking she'd thank me in some way that mattered. That version of me deserved better. And for the first time I realized, if I stayed, I was teaching her again, that I was willing to disappear for her comfort. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to be seen, even if it meant walking away. I started small, quiet steps. I printed out the receipts from the spreadsheet and slid them into a manila folder. Not to confront her, not yet, but to remind myself that I wasn't imagining things, that the weight I felt had numbers behind it, that I wasn't just emotional. I was exhausted from carrying what was never shared. I began to separate my things emotionally first, then physically. The books I brought in, the tools I used to assemble everything, the blankets I bought with my winter bonus. One evening while she was out, I carefully pulled my grandmother's lamp from the corner where it had sat untouched. Repacked it in the original box I'd hidden in the back of the closet. I wasn't stealing anything, I was retrieving pieces of myself, the ones I had loaned out so freely, the ones she claimed with her smile while erasing my fingerprints. I didn't announce it. I didn't slam doors. I just moved with the intention of someone remembering their worth. She didn't notice at first. She never noticed much unless it came with applause, but I did. I felt the shift. Each object back in my hands felt like a small reclaiming, a reminder that I wasn't furniture in her narrative. I was the one who furnished the whole thing. And slowly, I stopped making dinner, stopped filling the fridge, stopped asking if she was okay. I didn't do it to be cruel. I did it to see what would happen when I no longer held the emotional glue. The apartment didn't fall apart, but the silence between us got heavier. Not hostile, just hollow. The kind of silence that grows when someone realizes the performance is running out of audience. She began to notice the distance, but not in the way I expected. One night, as we sat on opposite ends of the couch, she looked up from her phone and said, "You've been weird lately. Is something wrong?" I wanted to laugh, not out of cruelty, but out of disbelief. As if the months of one-sided effort, the public erasure, the steady withdrawal of basic respect had all just been a flicker. "No," I said softly. "Nothing's wrong. I'm just tired." She nodded, satisfied with the answer, and went back to scrolling. That moment told me everything I needed to know. She didn't ask why I was tired. She didn't ask what kind of tired lives in your chest, the kind that can't be fixed by sleep or coffee. She didn't want truth. She wanted quiet. And for so long I had given her exactly that. I stared at the wall while she laughed at a video. And I thought about how many women are praised for their patience, when what they're really doing is shrinking to fit someone else's comfort. I had done it expertly, smiled through minimization, softened my edges, made myself easy to live beside and hard to recognize. But the cost? It was all mine. And as I sat there, invisible on the couch I'd financed in the room I'd painted, I realized something terrifying and liberating at once. I was never going to be properly seen here. Not because I wasn't worthy, but because she didn't want to look. She wanted the story of, I did it all myself. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to let her have that illusion, but without me holding it up anymore. That weekend, I packed a single bag and booked a room in a modest short-term rental across town. Nothing fancy, just enough space to breathe. I didn't leave a note. I didn't owe an explanation to someone who had rehearsed a life without me in it. Instead, I sent her a message after I closed the door behind me. "Don't worry, you can keep telling everyone, it's all yours now." That's finally true. I turned off my phone after that. For the first time in months, I slept through the night without waking up to dread. In the morning, I made coffee, in a chipped mug that wasn't trying to impress anyone. I opened the window, let the cold air rush in, and felt it sweep the guilt right off my chest. I wasn't angry anymore, just done. Done making myself small enough to fit into someone else's. Done paying for a version of love that treated my sacrifices like wallpaper. That Sunday, I bought a plant for my new space. Just a little thing. A fern, cheap and bright. I placed it near the window and smiled. Not because my life was suddenly perfect, but because, for once, everything in that room belonged to me. Every item, every inch, every breath. And when I stood in the quiet, there was no voice narrating over mine. No correction, no diminishing. Just presence. Real, imperfect. Mine. She didn't text back. I didn't expect her to. I knew how her stories worked. Edited, filtered, always starring herself. Let her have them. Let her tell the world she built it all alone, because in the end I built something far more valuable. A life where I never again have to ask for credit just to be counted. A few weeks passed without a word from her. No apology, no explanation, just silence, the kind that once would have eaten me alive. But now, it felt like distance I had earned. I spent my days working extra shifts, saving bit by bit, and spending. My evenings curled up in my new corner with soft light and softer music. The quiet no longer felt hollow. It felt safe. I started writing again just for myself. Short thoughts, fragments, truths I had swallowed for so long they almost didn't have shape anymore. I wrote things like, "She loved the version of me that stayed invisible, and you don't have to be bitter to walk away. Sometimes, peace just weighs less." I didn't know if they were good. I just knew they were mine. One night, while sorting through my inbox, I saw a calendar reminder I had forgotten to delete anniversary dinner. It flashed on the screen like a ghost of a life I no longer lived. Instead of deleting it, I opened a new document and began to write the story she'd never tell. Not the highlight reel she gave her friends, but the real story. The one where someone loved quietly and gave deeply and was erased anyway. I didn't write it to shame her. I wrote it to remind myself that I was there. That what I gave existed. That being written out of someone's script doesn't mean you were never part of the scene. I closed the laptop that night with a full breath and a settled chest, because I didn't need a stage anymore. I had finally found my voice, and this time I wasn't lowering it to make anyone else more comfortable. Not long after, a mutual friend reached out, someone who had been at the apartment that night. One of the ones who clapped when she said, "This is all mine." She messaged me out of the blue. I didn't know. "I'm sorry." I assumed that was all she wrote. And still, it sat in my chest, heavier than I expected. Assumed, that word echoed louder than blame. Because the truth is, most people don't question the stories they're handed, especially when they come packaged in charm and confidence. I stared at the message for a while, unsure how to respond. Eventually I wrote, "It's okay. I let her tell it that way for a long time, and that was the truth. I had smiled through so many moments of minimization. I had let her stand in front of what we built and act like she'd done it alone, because for a while, I thought love meant letting someone shine, even if they used your light to do it. But love without recognition isn't humility, it's erasure. And I was done participating in my own disappearance. After sending the reply, I closed my eyes and remembered the first night we moved in, eating takeout on the floor, laughing. With plastic forks, no furniture yet, just hope. She had looked me in the eyes that night and said, "This is ours." I think she meant it then, but somewhere along the way, ours became hers, and I just kept handing over pieces of myself until there was nothing left to decorate. No space left to claim until now, because now I wasn't asking to be included. I was building a space where no one had to be erased just to feel important. One afternoon, I passed by our old block on my way to the store. I hadn't meant to, my feet just drifted that way, pulled by a muscle memory I hadn't unlearned. Yet, the building stood unchanged, tall and indifferent. The same cracked step at the entrance, the same balcony railing we once wrapped in lights. I stood across the street for a moment, watching as someone came out carrying a box of takeout. I wondered if she still used my casserole dish, if the photos were still up, if she ever told anyone the truth when the party ended and the lights dimmed. But then I shook the thought from my head, because it didn't matter. Not anymore. That place wasn't home. Not because I had left, but because I had been left inside it long before I ever packed a bag. I walked to the bus stop and sat beside a teenager sketching in a notebook. He looked up and said, "You look like you've just walked away from something important." I smiled, surprised. "Maybe I have," I said. "Maybe I finally walked toward it." He didn't ask anything else, just nodded like he understood. And in that quiet, I felt more seen than I had in a year of living with someone who claimed the spotlight while I held the lights up. That evening, I added one more sticky note to my wall, next to all the others. It said, "Leaving isn't failure. Sometimes it's the bravest form of honesty." I stepped back and read every line I'd written since I left. And for the first time, I didn't feel like someone who got erased. I felt like someone who finally picked up the pen and decided to write herself back in. A few months later, I got a letter in the mail with no return address. Inside was a card with a short message. "I miss the way things were. Hope you're okay." No signature, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. Her loops always leaned a little too far left, like they were rushing to exit the page. I held it for a moment, letting the words settle in, not out of sentiment, but curiosity. The way things were. She missed the version of us where she took and I gave, where she spoke and I stayed silent, where my love was invisible but constant, like plumbing in a house unnoticed until it stops working. I didn't feel bitterness. I didn't even feel satisfaction, just distance, clean, earned, and necessary. I didn't write back. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said in the way I left, gently, fully, without slamming a single door. I placed the card in the back of a drawer, not as a keepsake, but as a reminder of what I'd outgrown. That week, I rearranged my apartment, hung up new curtains, moved the bed closer to the window, even bought a secondhand record player with the extra money I had saved. The music didn't fill the room completely, but it filled the parts of me that no longer felt ashamed of wanting more. Not material things, but recognition, reciprocity, truth, things that don't get gifted in cards, but lived out in presence. That Sunday, I hosted 2 friends for dinner in my small kitchen. We ate, laughed, and washed dishes together. No performance, no audience, just connection. And as I stood there drying a plate, I thought, this is all mine. And this time, I don't need to say it out loud to believe it. I began writing again. Not just sticky notes and journal entries, but full pages. Essays, fragments of memories, reflections that once felt too quiet to matter. I wrote about the apartment, the wine glasses, the invisible labor. About the moment I realized love without acknowledgement isn't love, it's performance. And I started sharing them anonymously online. Nothing went viral, but messages trickled in. People wrote, "I thought I was the only one, and your words sound like the inside of my head." And that was enough, not praise connection. Proof that even when your story feels stolen, the truth has a way of finding the light again. One evening I sat down with a fresh page and titled it, "The Cost of Being the Background." I wrote about the night she stood in my apartment and claimed it all. I didn't write to expose her. I wrote to honor the version of me, who stood in that doorway holding groceries and betrayal. That girl deserved to be documented. She deserved a name, a paragraph, a voice. When I finished, I lit a candle, poured a glass of wine, and sat by the window in the apartment I now called home, not because anyone else validated it, but because I had learned to validate myself. Everything around me was simple, mismatched. Plates, a cracked lamp, a secondhand rug. But none of it needed performance. It just needed care. And that's all I had left to give. Not to someone who needed a stage, but to a life that asked only for presence. Real, rooted mine. And somewhere in that quiet, I felt something settle. I had been erased once, but never again. One morning, I passed a boutique downtown that had a window display. She would have loved minimalist furniture. Cream-colored throws, a sign that read, "Make your space your own." I paused for a moment, watching a young couple inside pick out tableware together. They were laughing, playfully debating between plates. I smiled. Not because I missed that, but because I no longer craved it in the same way. I had learned something. Quieter. That partnership built on performance is just theater, and I was done being cast in someone else's script. I kept walking, the breeze warm against my face, the city moving around me without needing my permission. Back home, I pulled out the last note I'd written to myself and pinned it above my desk. It read, "You don't need witnesses to make something real." I stood there for a while, letting that truth wash over everything. The mess I'd survived, the silence I'd reclaimed, the woman I'd become. And then I sat down and opened a blank page. Not to write about her, not anymore, but to write about what comes after. The rebuilding, the unglamorous healing. The first laugh that isn't followed by guilt. The cup of tea that tastes like peace. The feeling of waking up and not needing to justify the air you take in. So if you've ever watched someone take credit for what you held together in the dark, let me say this: you are not invisible. You are not secondary. You are not just support. You are the architect. And when you finally walk away from the stage, the applause fades, but your story truly begins. So, what would your life look like if you stopped shrinking inside someone else's spotlight and finally stood in your own?